What's up, everybody? In today's video, I'm reviewing the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, the third book in Matt Dinniman's Dungeon Crawler Carl series. Now, I'll be honest, this one was my least favorite of the first three books. Doesn't mean it's bad, just means that it wasn't for me. I've been loving the series so far. However, I am a tad bit nervous for where things might be heading. This book had some great moments, but also kind of felt like we were spinning our wheels a bit. Still, the premise is really fun and interesting, and so I'm going to give it a shot again and stick around for book 4. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, welcome to Mysterious Galaxies, where I've been growing out this luscious mustache for about 7 weeks now, and I discuss all things science fiction, fantasy, and horror literature. So let's break down what's going on with this book and why I'm feeling a bit conflicted about it. So Dungeon Crawler Carl is a unique blend of lit RPG mechanics and a dystopian game show where the stakes they could not be any higher. For those of you who might be new to the series, the premise is basically Carl and other survivors are forced to battle their way through a deadly multi-level dungeon after Earth has been absolutely destroyed by aliens, came down and smashed us like a bug. Now, each level presents its own set of challenges, enemies, and bizarre obstacles, all while being broadcast as a reality show to an alien audience. The concept is kind of like a cross between the Hunger Games, Dungeons and Dragons, and your favorite RPG video game, which for me right now is Baldur's Gate 3. Now, in this installment, Carl and his trusty and still very sassy talking cat, Princess Donut, are back and they're thrown into the chaos of a new dungeon level. Unlike the second book, which leaned into an open world quest format, Anarchist Cookbook, it brings us back to a more structured dungeon crawling setup. Each level in the dungeon has a unique theme, and this time we are in the Iron Tangle. Now, the Iron Tangle is a mind-bending labyrinth-like network of train tracks. Imagine hundreds or, actually even thousands of interconnected train lines crisscrossing every direction, some elevated, some underground, all winding around in a chaotic mess. It's almost impossible maze where Carl and his group have to figure out how to get to the exit while dodging enemies and traps and other crawlers who are just as desperate to survive. The whole setting is getting more and more intense. Trains are constantly moving. There are monsters lurking on the tracks, and Carl and Donut have to navigate it all while trying to figure out the rules of this new level. But the Iron Tangle isn't just a mechanical challenge, it's a metaphorical one too. Carl is faced with tough decisions throughout the story, and there's a constant sense of tension. It's not just about surviving the level anymore, it's about figuring out who you can trust, what you're willing to do to win, and how far you're willing to go to protect the people you care about. The mix of humor and horror is still very much present, but in this book, the darker, more serious elements come to the forefront. The stakes are higher and the tone shifts at times, pulling away from the zany, chaotic fun of the earlier books and introducing some grim moments that really make you pause. Carl is starting to understand the full gravity of what's happening around him, and it's not just about staying alive for him anymore, it's about finding a way to beat the system, maybe even break free from the game itself. There's more character development here, especially for Carl. He has to make moral decisions that aren't as black and white as they were before, and the game is not just about leveling up anymore. It's about survival in a more personal, human sense. Now, Princess Donut, on the other hand, she, of course, continues to be the highlight. Absolutely love her. She's still hilarious, still overpowered, but in this book, we're seeing her deal with the emotional weight of what's happening. The bond between Carl and Donut is stronger than ever, and it's not just a comical duo dynamic anymore. There's a deeper connection here, one that adds a layer of emotional complexity to the story. Their partnership is being tested in new ways, and that's part of what makes this book feel a little more involved compared to the earlier installments. And as an aside, this is a minor spoiler based on my own speculation. So if you don't want to hear it, just like 30 seconds. It's not going to be long. With more and more conversations about Bea, Carl's cheating ex-girlfriend, and Ferdinand, the local cat that Donut was in love with, I think that we're getting some really strong foreshadowing of them making a return. I'm assuming they survived the collapse somehow and they're going to come back in a big way. Maybe either as hostages or enemies, but they're going to be back. I'm almost 100% sure of it. Now back to the Iron Tangle. The train theme itself is both a literal and figurative representation of the tangled, complex nature of Carl's journey. He no longer just is going from one dungeon floor to the next, facing increasingly difficult bosses. Now he's navigating the intricate and dangerous tracks of alliances, personal growth, and tough moral choices. It's a clever way for the story to mirror the chaos of the Iron Tangle, with internal struggles Carl faces as he dives deeper into the dungeon, and the consequences of the game just becoming even more real for him. In short, this book takes everything you loved about the first two books: wild action, RPG mechanics, leveling up, the dark dystopian edge, and it raises the stakes. And that's the great part. There's still plenty of humor, but the tone is definitely shifting towards something more serious, more intense. Carl and Donuts, they're not just playing a game anymore. They're fighting for survival in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and dangerous. What makes it good or bad? Let's talk about what worked and where this book didn't quite hit the mark for me. On the positive side, one of the biggest strengths of this book is how it adds a new level of seriousness to the story. Where the first two books in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series were full of absurd, laugh-out-loud moments, this one steps back a bit from the constant humor to introduce more emotionally complex situations. The stakes feel higher, and the gravity of Carl's situation is starting to really sink in, both for the characters and for us as the reader. There are moments where you can feel the tension building, and those darker, more serious elements really make you stop and think. It's not just a wacky RPG adventure anymore, it's a fight for survival, where the consequences are becoming more personal, and that shift in tone, it adds a depth that I really appreciated. And another thing I enjoyed about this book was the balance between revealing new information and maintaining an air of mystery. One of the problems I had with the second book was how it sometimes, it kind of felt like we were being spoon-fed too much information. Not just Carl, characters who knew more than we did, they would dump exposition, and it kind of took away from the thrill of discovery. But here, Dinniman, he kind of scales that back and returns to the more subtle storytelling approach of the first book. Instead of having everything explained to us, we get to figure out things alongside Carl. That sense of mystery, of not knowing exactly what's going on or what the rules of the game are, it pulls you deeper into the story and makes you feel like you're part of the journey. Now, another minor spoiler alert, so again, just feel free to skip ahead like 30 seconds if you don't want to hear it. The novel itself is called the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, and it's an actual item in the story itself. While it's a neat concept, it does feel a bit like Deus Ex Machina at times. The cookbook, it contains notes and insights from previous dungeon crawlers, which I thought was really interesting. It adds some historical depth, and it gives us a glimpse into past crawls. However, the problem is that it often acts as a quick fix for Carl. Instead of having to struggle through tough challenges or find creative solutions, the cookbook provides an easy answer, making it feel like Carl is getting out of situations a little too conveniently. But enough about that. Let's talk about the setting, because this is where things just did not work for me. The Iron Tangle, the maze of train tracks that Carl and Donut have to navigate, it just did not hit the mark. It's supposed to be chaotic and confusing, but instead of adding to the story, it felt like it subtracted from it. I get that it was meant to be disorienting and that Carl and the reader are supposed to feel lost, but there was no payoff. There are books that can pull off a confusing setup only to have everything, kind of click together with a big reveal at the end, but this was not one of them. There's even a preamble at the very beginning from the author where he tells us that some of the names and details in this book, they just do not matter. Which, in hindsight, it kind of makes me question why certain scenes or details were even there in the first place. And it felt like some parts were added just to fill space rather than push the plot forward. The Iron Tangle was just too nonsensical without adding any real value to the plot. Rather than building tension or driving the story forward, it felt like we were spinning in circles without any meaningful progression. The confusion didn't create excitement or mystery, it just made things feel messy. It's like we were stuck in this endless maze, but the maze wasn't leading anywhere. And by the time we moved past it, I felt like the story had lost some of its momentum. What could have been a thrilling, tightly woven level just felt like a convoluted detour that ultimately didn't add much to the experience. In fact, the setting felt more like a distraction than anything else. It pulled me out of the story because I kept waiting for the big aha moment where everything would make sense, but it just never came. Instead, it just made the story harder to follow and less engaging, which was disappointing because I know how creative and exciting the world building can be in this series. The Iron Tangle for me, it was a missed opportunity. Again, definitely my least favorite. Another downside for me was how the balance between humor and seriousness, it just didn't always feel seamless as it did in the first two books. Don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of humor in the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, but the transitions between the funny, absurd moments and the darker, more intense scenes, they just weren't as smooth. Overall, while the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook, it has some fantastic moments. I'm specifically talking about Katya, and it definitely improves on some of the issues from the second book. It's just not without its flaws. The darker tone and more focused plot are big positives, but the pacing and tonal inconsistencies kept it from being as tight and addictive as the first book. It's still a great read, but it didn't hit the highs of the earlier installments for me. If you're invested in the series, you'll need to read this one to continue following Carl and Donut's journey. While the story itself is important for progressing the series, again, it's my least favorite. That said, the progression system, leveling up, the evolving magical abilities, it remains some of the strongest aspects of the book. So if you love the mechanics of video games or tabletop RPGs, this book still delivers that addicting feeling of powering up and facing new challenges. But if you're hoping for a setting as thrilling and dynamic as the earlier books, you might find this floor a bit underwhelming. Also, I've been switching between reading and also listening to the audiobooks. And if you're an audiobook fan, Jeff Hayes continues to be an absolute legend. His range of voices, they're incredible. Carl's deep, gruff tone, Donut's high-pitched sass. It's amazing how he nails each character. It's not just the variety of the voices, it's the way he brings each character to life without relying on accents or stereotypes. I cannot recommend the series enough in audiobook form. Jeff Hayes is right up there with the best narrators in the game, and he adds so much to the experience. To wrap things up, while the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook wasn't my favorite, it still had moments I enjoyed. Side characters get more shine, and I liked learning more about the aliens hosting this year's dungeon crawl. I'm starting book 4 tonight, and I'm hoping that the series rebounds and gets back to what I enjoyed so much about the first two books. With any luck, I'll get through the remainder of the series before book 7 comes out later this month. But that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching my review. As always, happy reading, and I will see you on the next one.